I'm not the mother he needs. I'm just a waitress scraping by. Nora stood motionless at the gate of the million-dollar mansion, her hands trembling and her heart heavy. Inside, the mute little boy had just called her Mom for the very first time. But she knew. She didn't belong there. She didn't belong under those crystal chandeliers, amid the disdainful glances and before a wealthy single father waiting on her decision. Could someone who'd abandoned her own dreams possibly be worthy of becoming someone else's miracle? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you amazed. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. Winter in Boulder, Colorado is no friend to those unaccustomed to the cold. For Nora, each morning that snow lay thick was its own battle. The wind howled through the crack beneath her tiny apartment window, biting to the bone. She hurried into her threadbare sweater, stuffed a few coins into her pocket, and made her way to the Rusty Spoon, the diner on the street corner by the mountainside where she'd worked for over a year. Nora arrived in Colorado with bright eyes and a backpack full of dreams. She once believed that with enough hard work, the stage would open its arms to her. But mounting bills, tuition that climbed with each semester, and her brother's illness back home meant that every role on paper remained an unproduced script. Now she poured coffee by day, delivered meals by night, and squeezed in weekend piano lessons. Her passion for the arts was contained in an old notebook, tucked away in a drawer with a creaking hinge. The Rusty Spoon wasn't fancy, but it was warm. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee and waffles always made life feel more bearable. That morning, Nora was working the early shift. It was colder than usual, and more customers than normal sought refuge from the snow and a bit of comfort. She was carrying a tray of waffles when the door swung open. A blast of frigid air preceded a tall man with a burdened gaze and a small boy in his arms. Both were wrapped in a strange silence. The boy neither spoke nor smiled, barely reacting when set into the window seat. Other patrons glanced over, then looked away. They didn't recognize Carter Hale, the silent millionaire behind a chain of luxury retirement homes. Today, he was just a father who had no idea how to help his son utter a single word. Jonah, the 6-year-old, had sorrowful, coal-black eyes. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't touch his food. He barely breathed. Carter flipped through the menu, forcing himself to choose. His movements were clumsy, unnatural. When the food arrived, the boy stared at the plate. His hand trembled. Then the spoon slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the tile floor. The metallic clink was barely audible. Yet in that hush, it felt like a blade slicing through the silence. Carter bent to pick it up, fumbling for a napkin. But before he could, Jonah recoiled, tiny fingers clutching at his father's sleeve. Quiet, tense, desperate. No one in the diner moved forward. No one knew what to do, or perhaps no one thought they needed to, except Nora. She stepped lightly over, set the waffle tray down, then knelt beside the wooden chair. The daylight glinting in her eyes gave her a gentle, understanding look. She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" She already knew. No one here was. Unhurried, unafraid, Nora picked up the spoon, wiped off the dirt with the edge of her apron, then reached out and took Jonah's hand, gently prying his fingers away from his father's sleeve. His palm was cold and damp with sweat, but she did not recoil. She leaned in close, minimizing any distance. Then she spoke, just loud enough. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Jonah didn't answer right away, but his eyes flickered. Slowly, almost timidly, he nodded. Nora smiled, a soft smile that seemed to say she'd been waiting for that nod all morning. She slipped her hand into her apron pocket. There she kept a small bag of trinkets for crying children. Marbles, cartoon stickers, and a plastic T-Rex with faded paint on its tail. She set the dinosaur on the table. No words. Jonah stared. Then he reached out, and at some point, without anyone noticing, his lips curved up. a very slight but genuine smile, the first of the day. Carter remained frozen as if witnessing something from a world beyond his reach, a kind of magic money couldn't buy, born of simple compassion. The diner felt as warm as ever, but in the heart of that father, something had just begun to thaw.
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Carter returned to the Rusty Spoon just 3 days after that first morning. He hadn't planned it, nor given any notice. He simply pulled up to the curb as if the steering wheel knew its way back. He told himself it was for the waffles here. Soft, aromatic, and drizzled with just the right amount of syrup. But as he pushed open the chipped wooden door, his hand trembled slightly. Jonah still didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't even point at the menu. The boy walked with short steps, his hand gripping his father's coat lapel as if it were the only tether holding him to the world. Carter chose the exact same table as before and seated Jonah by the window, where just enough light filtered through the thin curtain. Nora was wiping down tables in the corner. When she looked up and saw them, she simply offered a gentle smile and a nod. No questions, no noticeable reaction beyond her usual friendliness. Not a hint that she had been the one to draw a smile from that silent little boy after weeks of quiet. Carter realized she was unlike anyone he had ever met. No performance, no forced sympathy, no special treatment, because she knew he had money. That was exactly what made him stay and come back again and again. Every few days, sometimes every weekend morning, Carter and Jonah would step into the Rusty Spoon. The same table, the same seats, the same familiar atmosphere. Carter always had an excuse. Sometimes that the diner was so peaceful. Other times that the pastries here weren't too sweet. But the real reason he came was to witness the moment when Jonah's gaze met Nora's. That look wasn't a sudden burst of joy. It was something deeper, quietly glowing, like a small light kindled in a long dark room. Each time Nora appeared with a tray of drinks or a napkin in hand, Jonah would tilt his head slightly. A bit of attention, a bit of opening up. Nora never said much. She went about her work as usual, swiftly, diligently, with no wasted gesture. But Carter began to notice. She remembered that Jonah preferred his drink in a smaller glass, no straw, because he was frightened by the slurping sound. She placed a cloth mat instead of plastic, knowing the rustling noise might startle him. She didn't ask, didn't insist, she simply adjusted in silence. Then one day, as Carter was absorbed in the blurred headlines on his phone, he heard a voice, small, hesitant, fragile like a toddler's first steps. "Ms. Nora?" He snapped his head up. Nora stood a few paces away. She didn't react immediately, perhaps because she couldn't believe what she had heard. But then she turned and smiled. No question in return, no excited gasp. She simply nodded gently, as if Jonah had spoken an ordinary sentence. She didn't make the moment grand because she understood. For that boy, silence was safety. Carter didn't know what to do. He just sat there, his heart hammering in his chest, so overwhelmed he couldn't sip his now lukewarm coffee. In that instant, a door inside him swung open. Emotions long restrained, regret, gratitude, all poured forth like spring water breaking ice. He had once hired the best doctors, the most acclaimed speech therapists, spending tens of thousands of dollars just to hear his son utter a word. But here, in this small diner, amid the scent of waffles and the clink of spoons against cups, Jonah had called someone's name. Not his own, not the nurse's, but a country girl in a threadbare apron with gentle eyes and hands that never forced. It couldn't just be a coincidence. That morning, the Rusty Spoon was unusually crowded. Chairs scraped across the tile floor, spoons and forks clattered, and laughter from the large table by the kitchen echoed through the room. No one noticed the little boy huddled in the corner, hands clamped over his ears, shoulders trembling like a small storm raging within. Carter recognized those signs well. He sprang to his feet, ready to scoop Jonah into his arms. But before he could touch his son, Nora was already kneeling in front of him. She asked no questions, gave no orders. She simply sat down beside the boy, closing the gap as if the world around them had shrunk to just the two of them. Her arms slid around his shoulders with just the right pressure, neither too tight nor too loose, enough for Jonah to know he was not alone. Carter froze, his hands suspended midair. He had never seen anyone handle panic like that. No nanny he'd ever hired, no matter how many credentials she held or how much experience she had ever calmed a meltdown with such simple gentleness. Nora leaned close to Jonah's ear and softly hummed a low melody, an old, sorrowful folk tune from Oklahoma, the land of harvest seasons and crimson gusts where she grew up. That melody did more than soothe Jonah. It stilled Carter's own heart, standing silently behind them. He didn't know the lyrics, but what he understood perfectly was this. Jonah had stopped trembling. The boy leaned his head against Nora, eyes still open, but the panic had receded like tidewater, withdrawing from the sand. Carter offered no thank you, not because he didn't feel grateful, but because his throat wouldn't form a single sound in that moment. That evening, Carter's office stayed lit long after business hours. He didn't go home. Instead, he called Nora without preamble and invited her to meet, formally. No one else would be there. Just him and her, in the amber-toned wood-paneled room, surrounded by large frame paintings in the soft glow of a desk lamp. Nora arrived in her worn coat, hands still trembling from the snow outside. She didn't understand the reason for this meeting, and suspicion filled her heart. But Carter's serious gaze and calm voice carried no hint of pity. He placed a slim folder on the desk, a proposal so simple it felt almost surreal. He wanted her to become Jonah's full-time support, not a housekeeper, not a nurse, but the person by his side, observing, caring for, and walking alongside the boy, as she had done unprompted. Carter spoke succinctly, each word deliberate. The offer included a full scholarship so she could return to art school and complete the years she'd left unfinished. He'd arranged her class schedule, housing, and even a stipend for her brother. Every detail mapped out meticulously, like the investments he strategized daily. Nora fell silent. She hadn't seen this coming. Each of Carter's words seemed to push open a door she'd long kept shut, a passage back to old dreams, where stage lights still illuminated the dust of nostalgia in her heart. Yet at the same time, a tight knot of discomfort rose in her chest. She stared at the folder for a long moment, then looked up. Her eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "Thank you," she said, "but I can't accept." Carter's surprise was plain to see. Nora bowed her head, clasping her hands together as if holding something fragile within. "I know I'm poor," she breathed, "and I know I've been exhausted for a long time. But if I step into that world empty-handed and everything is laid out before me, I won't be myself anymore." She stood, her eyes unwavering. "I don't want it to become a charity case." The room fell silent. It wasn't her refusal that unsettled Carter, but her reason. There was something in Nora, not stubborn pride, but a quiet dignity, that made her no sound like a declaration of self. He said nothing further, watching her close the door behind her and step into the snow-laden night. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the surprising turns ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we know you're still with us. Carter returned to the rusty spoon for the last time, this time without hesitation. Jonah didn't come along. No waffles, no pretense. He simply stood before Nora, his gaze stripped of its usual cool reserve, as if shedding a shell he'd worn for years. He brought no brilliant promises, only one line, short and sincere. "I'm not here to buy anything. I just want to give Jonah someone he can truly trust." And Nora nodded. No soaring dreams were proclaimed, only a quiet decision. She packed away her belongings into an old suitcase, not overflowing but heavy. Not from clothes, but from the knowledge that she was stepping into a world that had never been hers. Beyond her means, beyond her station, beyond anything she had ever imagined. Yet she walked in not for Carter, but for Jonah. The first step inside the mansion made her chest tighten, not from awe, but from feeling out of place. Everything in the house was silent, immaculate, disturbingly pristine. People regarded her as if she were a passing interruption, soon to vanish. Their disdain needed no words. She saw it in the butler's drawn-out, "And where are you from, miss?" in the way eyes flicked over her apron before quickly looking away, in the breakfast invitations that never came a second time when she had declined the first. They didn't need to know who she was. They just needed to believe she didn't belong. She did not react. She knew this world. It was nothing like the little diner, nothing like the raucous boarding house, nothing like the stage she once dreamed of. But the feeling of being treated as unworthy was all too familiar. Just like when, as a child, her mother brought home a loaf of bread from the charity station and warned, "Don't look anyone in the eye, or you'll see what they really think." Nora had never been trusted without conditions, but Carter asked nothing after she accepted. He needed no progress reports, no daily logs. He needed only one thing, that she be there for Jonah in her own way. And she did so, without complaint. She made no attempt to claim a place in the house. She did not strike up conversations with the staff. She did not persuade anyone that she deserved to be there. She knew it was useless, so she focused on the only thing she knew she could do right: be present for Jonah. When the doorbell panic set in, she sat beside him, not to coax, but so he would know he was not abandoned. When he cowered at the vacuum's roar, she gently switched it off and sat down on the floor, reading an old story in her calm, low voice. When he refused to eat, she did not force him. She simply placed his favorite treat within reach and left the room, letting him choose. Carter saw it all. He did not intervene, but each time he passed the room and found Jonah asleep against Nora's shoulder, he felt an unfamiliar emotion swell within him. Not relief, but a sense of security he'd feared lost forever when his wife died. He had thought that to heal Jonah, he needed experts. He needed therapies. He needed structure. But Nora had none of those things. She did not pore over medical texts or analyze symptoms. She offered something far simpler: the steadfast devotion of someone who promised nothing but presence. Silence between them became its own language. No explanations needed, no justification required. She understood the boy by instinct. He trusted her by feeling. And for the first time in that house, Jonah began to take more steps on his own. Not because anyone urged him, but because finally he knew. If he turned back, someone would be there. No judgment, no obligations, just someone truly there to believe. Change never arrives with a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly, like warmth gradually permeating a cold room. And for Jonah, it began on a morning as peaceful as any other, except that he walked out of his room on his own, clutching a comic book and mumbling a few short, indistinct words that Nora understood well enough. He wanted her to read with him. Then came scattered letters, then short sentences, and one day, just weeks later, he read a complete line at once. His voice was weak, trembling, halting, but the sentence was whole. Carter stood nearby, his hand tightening on the chair, his throat dry. Something welled up in his chest, both relief and a sting of sorrow, like realizing that his child's voice had always been there. He just needed someone patient enough to stay and listen. From that moment on, everything changed, though no one ever said so aloud. Carter began coming home earlier. He no longer asked, "How's Jonah today?" as though seeking a report. He sat with his son and listened, absorbing each awkward word, each day's brighter glance. And when night fell and Jonah was sleeping soundly, Carter sometimes stepped out to the porch where Nora sat with a cup of cool tea, gazing toward the mountain ridge. Conversations started without reason. Not out of politeness, nor with any barrier between employer and helper. Just two people sitting together when the world was silent. He spoke of the years he once called life, which in hindsight felt empty. The meetings, the deals, the frantic purchases of things he thought would bring happiness. He spoke of his ex-wife, not at length, just fragments of memory that still haunted him. She had left not by death, but by the slow erosion of love he had failed to sustain. Nora did not interrupt. She did not say, "I understand," because she knew no one ever truly understands another's pain. Then it was her turn. She spoke of her dream of the stage, not the glamorous vision others assumed, just at a small girl trembling backstage in high school, longing for applause, wishing to step into the spotlight. But that year, her mother fell ill, her brother needed medicine, and tuition was a luxury. She chose to work. She chose to step back. And gradually, her passion became nothing more than dialogue notes in a notebook, read each night after washing dishes. Carter was silent long after hearing her story. He understood the loss of something precious, not through carelessness, but circumstances. The feeling of asking yourself, if I don't step back, who will pay the price? Such nights continued all winter. No grand revelations were spoken, just tiny pieces of soul laid bare in silence. And in those silent spaces, something formed, neither hurried nor clear, like pale light from a small fire, enough to warm two people long acquainted with cold. Jonah, unaware how much he'd changed, still colored each afternoon, but now occasionally he'd look up and ask Nora a question, or tell his father about some detail in the story. He was no longer the boy hiding behind his father's sleeve. He was becoming the storyteller of his own life. And Nora, still the quiet girl of the first day, but now her eyes were different. No longer guarded, no longer weary of defense. She did not know where this life would take her, but for the first time in years, she stopped planning her departure. She had chosen to stay. Not because she was kept, but because here, for the first time, she saw she could be herself. Not a waitress, not a savior, not an uninvited guest. Just one person, truly being heard. A year does not pass like a gust of wind. It quietly leaves its mark on every thread of life's fabric, every glance, every small change that seems insignificant. But anyone who saw Jonah a year ago would pause when they saw him racing down the brightly lit hallway today. He no longer hides behind his father, avoids strangers' eyes, or lowers his head as if bearing the weight of the world on his small shoulders. Jonah laughs, a real, unforced, unhesitating smile. He laughs, then calls out, "Mom, Nora," each time the music ends on the small stage at the community center. And from the front row, Nora rises to accept the paper flower he's folded himself, unevenly colored, petals slightly askew, yet containing a full year of patience, love, and trust. Jonah's Voice Therapy Center was founded on a windless, rainless spring day. Only gentle sunlight and a crowd gathered before the newly erected sign. A place where children once labeled silent now have a space to raise their voices in their own way. This place isn't like any medical facility. There are no sterile halls or rigid nameplates. Instead, hand-painted walls display children's artwork. There's a cozy reading corner and a small performance room where each week Nora takes the stage, telling stories with her eyes and a gentle voice that stitches hearts back together like thread through a tear. She doesn't just tell stories to the children. She tells them to anxious parents, to souls who've lost their way, and to herself, the girl who once abandoned the stage to fill her brother's plate back home. Now that dream hasn't returned in its old form. It's come back along a different path, where art is no longer about glory, but about connection and healing. Nora doesn't perform, she simply shows up, and that touches deeper than any role she might have played. Carter often stands at the back of the room, unobtrusively, silently watching. The woman he once thought was just a waitress is now doing what he, with all his money, could not. Creating a place where children who seemed unable to grow normally can flourish in their own way. They never announced their love. There was no grand proposal, no lavish wedding. Their relationship grew from trust and evolved into something more enduring than vows. gratitude, presence, and the steadfast choice to stay. That evening, when the performance ended, applause filled the auditorium. The children bowed, then ran to their parents, faces radiant, hearts wide open. Jonah was the last to dash onto the stage. In his hand was a pale blue paper flower. The color Nora once said was like the Oklahoma sky after rain. She knelt and embraced him. He whispered something so soft that only she could hear. Carter stood behind her, his expression softened, then took a step forward. In that brief moment, no fanfare, no spotlight, he took her hand. His hand, once cold and shut tight, used to decide with logic alone, now squeezed hers as if it had finally learned what support means. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice dissolving into the air, "for teaching me how to love again." Nora said nothing, but her grip tightened. Their story did not end with a wedding or a ring. It ends with a laughter-filled center, a once silent boy who now offers flowers, a father who once feared emotion and has learned to sit quietly beside another, and a country girl who once believed she was merely a blur in someone else's world, now stands at the heart of a gentle, irreplaceable miracle.